Hey guys, welcome to another edition of Then versus Now, where I show you photos or videos of a plant in the past and then show you what it looks like now. So basically it's a growth updates video, but I have enough footage now, like historical footage on my YouTube channel, where I can actually pull old footage of plants and show you what they look like now. So I really like these kinds of videos to film and also to watch, because I like to see transformations. I don't know about you. Full disclaimer, I am feeling like poo-poo caca today. So if you're seeing this video, that means I didn't scrap the footage. The lighting sucks. It's another dreary, rainy day, but the whole week is gonna be like this. But hopefully we can make it work. I really want to just like be on the couch and drinking tea right now. There's something going around in Vancouver, and luckily a sick day means I get to do my favorite thing in the whole world, which is stay the frick home. Let's see, what's there? What's there? I don't feel gross enough to be like laying in bed, but also not good enough to feel all there. So if I don't seem like I'm all here, just because like I got this pressure in my head, and like, you know that weird kind of cardboard taste in your mouth when you're sick, but I'm not like bedridden yet. So we're filming. I've got 7 plants to show you, which, by the way, does this mean 7 to anyone else? Is this just like a Chinese Taiwanese thing? Because this to me means 7. This is 6. Anyways, so I don't know if I want to do this in like chronological order in terms of like how far back I have the footage. Let's just go random. Let's just go random. So when I show you the past footage of the plant, I'm gonna put a little date, time, month stamp on that footage, and then I'll show you the plant. So the first one I'm gonna show you is one of like my all-time favorites. I think it's pretty much a staple on this channel, but I haven't shown it in its like full form in quite a long time. So my Philodendron Gloriosum. So back in October, roughly 6 months ago, I chopped this plant up in a repot with me. It had outgrown its planter, and I potted the top up and I kept it in my tent. So it was in pond, my pond mix of lechuza pond, perlite, and orchiata, fine grade orchiata. And it just would not stop growing, you guys. It was already borderline too big for the tent. It outgrew that pot so fast. So here he is now. I cannot see the camera. I'm gonna have to back up more. So yeah, he grew quite a bit in the last 6 months. So here's the stem. Lucky for me, it decided to make a little turn at the corner instead of growing straight out. And it doesn't look like it's gonna turn again. So it's gonna grow straight out the front here. Is this interesting for you, Huxley? Or not really? You're so quiet. So just recently I had to kick him out of my tent. I know he doesn't need to live in the tent. It was just really nice to have him in the tent, because the thing about growing a Gloriosum in the tent is that the tent is super warm, and with these like white veins Gloriosums, warmth, I believe, is what makes it grow these like zebra veins. So this leaf here that has a lot more of like the speckly secondary veining in here, this was grown summertime, and then this was grown in the winter time. So you can see that the veining is a lot cleaner, and it's not like, it just doesn't have as much of that speckly zebra veins. Here is another leaf grown in warmer temperatures. I'll also throw a photo up of when it was grown during like a heat wave. It was very, very hot. I would say averaging like mid-30s for a couple of months. It was a really hot summer, and the Gloriosum got so veiny during that time. So like, I know it doesn't need to grow in a tent, but the tent conditions and the humidity makes it produce less EFN, and those EFN spots can kind of like burn through the leaves. Actually, recently I read a little comment on Facebook. People always identify those EFN spots as rust fungus. There was a thread trying to identify these like little dots that burn through the leaves. And the original poster was saying like it's definitely EFN related, because it's exactly in the spots where the EFN was produced. And then Bill Rotolante piped up and said that they are tumid mites, that they are attracted to those EFN spots, and then they kind of like spread it around, and that ends up burning through the spots. And the less EFN that the plant produces, the less you have to like clean off the EFN spots. So far, after living outside in my living room for a week or so, it hasn't just like exploded with stickiness, but in time, I think it will. So this now lives in my living room that has like 40% humidity, under 32, is it 32 watt or 35 watt, the Russo pendant light. So it gets good light. The temperatures aren't too bad. It's just like pretty low humidity there. I'm very sad to report that he needs a repot soon. I don't know if you're gonna be able to see how it bulges. Like this planter is so full of roots. It rooted, I mean, it's not super root bound, but it is getting like really full in here, and it's actively unfurling this leaf right here. Let's reveal the veining. So I find during this stage of the Gloriosum leaf unfurling is the easiest to see like the veining, because it has like this like pinkish hue to it, and the green is so neon. So if I just put them up to the camera, you can see that it is that very clean white veining, not the zebra veining. Do you see Huxley there? Hux, are you okay? I'm just gonna try to put these two leaves together. So this is summer growth and winter growth. Albeit this leaf is showing some underwatering stress, but just so you can see the difference, it is not super dramatic with my specimen, but the difference is there. Anyways, we're gonna leave them there. We'll move on to the next plant. So my Philodendron Heterochrospedon hasn't grown a ton in the last year. So I first showed him roughly a year ago, let's see. So I first showed him on this channel in February of last year. So just about 13, 14 months ago. At the time it was in moss and it wasn't growing very fast, and the leaves that I was getting were kind of having a hard time coming out of the sheet. So they kept getting like cosmetic damage and just kind of scuffing itself up coming out of the cataphyll. Fast forward a few months later, I got it out of moss and I put it into pon. And I'm not 100% sure, but I think that it was killer pon. So if you're new to this channel, killer pon is a batch of pon that I mixed where I put in Osmocote, and it basically burned every single plant that got planted in that batch of pon, and it was really, really bad. I lost some plants completely, and then a lot of plants went into like rehab mode. So this hetero was one of those plants. So here she is now, looking so much better. I got it planted into tree fern fiber. I can't exactly say when. I think it was in the fall of last year, maybe like 5 or 6 months ago, and it freaking loved it. It's in no drainage. It's tree fern fiber mixed with just a few scoops of my pon mix. So there's like perlite orchiata in there as well. And it rooted so fast. It started rooting in a way that I've never seen this plant root before. And it's not like fully root bound or anything, but with this plant, I was always kind of confused why it was growing, because it wasn't really growing roots. And the roots that it grows is kind of like, I don't know if it's a characteristic of this plant, but it's kind of underwhelming roots, kind of like Melanochrysum. In my experience, Milano always grows these like very just spindly, kind of weak little roots. And I could never figure out how a Milano can grow large leaves with these like crappy little roots. So this is kind of like my experience with the hetero. These kinds of roots I never saw on this plant before. It really, really liked this substrate. And this is one of the first times I had planted a philodendron in tree fern. Yeah, it's good. And it's finally growing steadily, sizing up. So the growth rate is so much more satisfying since it got into tree fern. The growing conditions hadn't changed. It's been in my tent this whole time. It's not even on a pole. It's growing really ramrod straight, which is really nice because I kind of don't want to get onto a pole. I mean, I wouldn't mind getting onto a pole, but I can see that I have this like hanging on the back grid. So it'll be a little bit harder for me to hang. Not impossible, but it would make this plant quite a bit heavier with the pole. So it would just be like oh my gosh. I don't know if you can see Huxley. He's got his chin on my leg.
That's just so precious.
So all in all, I wouldn't say this is like a super easy plant. It's not like a very hard plant. I find it hard to propagate. I've only ever had one propagation succeed, and that propagation now lives with Charmaine. So her hetero is propagation from this plant. So the propagation success rate isn't very high. And I find that the roots, it's not a vigorous rooter. So rooting this plant is not super easy, which is kind of tying into like the lack of ease of propagation. But since tree fern, it's gotten a lot stronger, and it's probably to do with like the bigger root system where it's able to take up nutrients and it's able to unfurl properly. So this is the second newest leaf, And it's like, it's getting closer to the size that it was when I first imported it, which was quite a really long leaf. It's just very satisfying to finally see it looking like this. This is the newest leaf. It got a little bit warped here. You see that curve because it was growing into another plant. So it kind of hardened off this way, but we don't have the damage up top anymore from when it was unfurling. Like you'll see it on older leaves. Like older leaves, I had like little rips from when it was like struggling to come out of the sheath. A question that I get often is like, what do I plan to move a plant to after being in tree fern, or like what's the long-term substrate after tree fern for a particular plant? My answer is like, I don't see tree fern necessarily as like just a rooting substrate or like a temporary substrate. I don't see that there's any reason why you couldn't grow a plant long-term in tree fern. It may not be a nutritious substrate in and of itself, but the same could be said for like leca or pon, because pon, the slow release that's included in lechuzapon, will run out in 3 to 4 months anyways. I don't really see tree fern as like a temporary substrate. It's certainly too expensive to just be a rooting substrate. I don't feel a need to get this out of tree fern anytime soon. I think once I get it onto a pole, I will still keep it on tree fern. And tree fern mixed with soil is also like one of my favorite substrates these days. My anthuriums are growing really well in them. I get way better roots in a tree fern soil mix versus just like a soil mix, like an aeroid soil. And then before we put them away, just a quick moment to appreciate that red back. It's so yummy. It will eventually fade to just straight green, but this is one of my favorite moments of this plant. Every time I look at this plant, I can't decide if I like this better or the Patricia better. I really think it's just 50-50. If you don't have one, you've been wanting one, the prices are so good for them now, so I highly recommend this plant. Just give it like high humidity, warmth, and good amount of light to begin with. And then I can't speak to growing this out in ambient conditions. I'm sure it can be done. I just never done it. So yeah, I think that's all I got to say. Speaking of Patricia, I showed this plant back in December, so not very long ago, in my first then versus now video. I actually didn't think it had grown that much since then, but it actually had. And also since then it has been repotted into no drainage and gotten a tree fern fiber pole. So here she is now. She looks so good. She's one of my pride and joys because I grew her from just a teeny little mid-cut, and I'm so proud of her. Before I got a Patricia, I've only ever heard horror stories of like failed propagations, and this was a propagation that I got. It was just a mid-cut. It was a really tiny node, about this big, with roots, I think, and it was in moss, and it just got stuck in my tent and it just freaking took off. So the newest leaf got a little bit banged up because it was all soft and like still hardening off when I repotted it, so it got a little bit bent during the process. And I was showing these like what looks like EFN spots, and we can see these like neon dots all over it. And as the leaf hardened, it did kind of like get a little bit less noticeable, but it is still there. But I can't see like pest damage on the plant or anything, so I think we're okay. But this plant is getting like longer and longer and more dimpled and more ruffly. All this was not even grown on a pole. It was just kind of like, just like the Heterochrospedon, it was just growing wherever it wanted to. It got watered less than it probably wanted water. This plant I find to be a really thirsty plant, which is why I got into no drainage. I wanted it in a more dense soil and no drainage. So there is like a leca layer at the bottom. You won't be able to see it very well, but it is black leca. So I wanted to be able to have a little bit of a reservoir, not a lot. I didn't want it to be like mud, but just in the interest of like keeping this plant hydrated for longer, because this plant got bone dry and like super droopy and thirsty more times than I'd like to admit. And somehow, like, look at the leaves. Like, we don't even have like brown tips or anything. I mean, I guess this is the extent of the brown tips. She's just such a champ. I cannot say enough good things about this plant. It is so good. I highly recommend it. I have this growing inside my large exo, which I say is a low humidity exo. It was probably only like 60% humidity. I probably should check the humidity, but it's not a very humid exo. I don't have it like rigged up for for humidity or anything. It's just slightly higher than ambient, and I know this plant can definitely be grown outside in ambient conditions. I would say if you wanted to grow a Patricia out in ambient, I would probably kind of do more of like a bit by bit transition if you're interested in like not having any cosmetic damage, because like with these really long leaf philodendrons, they have more of a chance of like ripping itself when it comes out of the sheath because it has so much more length to kind of emerge, so more chances for it to like kind of ding itself. Or just be on top of like misting that leaf so there's like enough lubrication for it to come out. But once it's established and has a good root system, I don't think anyone should have like much issue growing this out in ambient conditions. I don't know if I ever will, because this looks quite nice inside of an exo, but if one day I were to ever get rid of my exos, I don't know if that day will ever come, but if that day comes, then I have no fears that this plant will acclimate to like a living room. I am so excited to see what the next leaf will look like after this one, in like a more nutritious, denser soil and with a pole. Like I'm hoping that it outgrows this one because it's just so great. And I cannot even believe how cheap these plants are now from like Equigenera or Tropicals. It's like $30–40 I think US. I really don't want to talk about how much we paid for this plant when it came in, but at the time, it really didn't seem like the bubble was gonna burst and the prices, like especially of this plant, was gonna drop so quickly and so dramatically. Okay, my arm is tired. Put you down.
Huxley, you're never this cuddly when I'm filming. What's going on today? What's going on? Are you sad? Are you sad? Oh, my sweet baby. You're such a good boy.
Okay, so one of my wish list plants last year was the Diasporia discolor. At the time, it was really hard to find this plant. I think I only knew one person locally who had it. I think now it's really easy to find because it is such a fast grower, but when I first got it, I stuck it in water. It was a longish cutting, I think with 2 leaves, and I chopped it in half and I got both of those nodes, I guess, in water. Charmaine did the same with hers, but hers seemed to root a lot faster than mine. I couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong because mine would not root. It wouldn't die, wouldn't rot. It was just like sitting in water, doing nothing. Someone left a comment on Charmaine's channel like, lol, you can't propagate that plant without tubers, good luck. Well, bitch, what's this then? So before filming, I had to like basically untangle this whole thing. It lives inside my exo and it has like a grid wall in the back, and it had wrapped itself and twirled on itself all through the grid. She needs a trellis, but I'm so happy that it's finally growing. Like it rooted, I put it into pon, and this one is just like straight lechuza pon without the amendments because everyone was telling me that it was a very thirsty plant. So I wanted something a bit more dense than like my chunkier pond mix. And for the longest time I was getting these dinky little leaves that just had like one solid color. It didn't have that like variegation pattern. And then when I got it into higher light, I got it maybe like this far away from the Barena lights, and then the patterning started to come through, and that made me so happy. This leaf got quite big, but it's starting to get a bit burned. There's light burn here at the bottom. This leaf is quite nice. This leaf is still growing, so it's not close to being done. And like the leaves can get much bigger than this. Like Lauren had an exo full of these, and the leaves are like the size of my palm. So it needs a trellis for sure. And even with this plant on a trellis, you're gonna have to like prune it back constantly or like find ways to wind itself because it will just grab something so fast. So one time it had wrapped itself around the grid, and I was like, I don't want you kind of growing through the grid because I'm not gonna be able to pull you back out again. So I untwirled him and just kind of like pulled the vine to the side. Probably like 2 hours later, I came back into the room and it had wound itself out again on that grid. Like these things are fast, and that's probably why they are not allowed to be exported from Ecuador. There definitely have been people who weren't able to import this plant because it's listed as an invasive species because like it freaking grows like this, and it will just like vine and twirl and choke out other plants. But that's good in a way for the houseplant community because it grows so fast, and we can kind of like propagate and share this plant a lot quicker because I think a lot of people really like this plant. So my way of rooting it was water that I never changed. It got really gross and algae ridden. Lauren's way was just throw it into a terrarium, like literally just into a terrarium. It had moss at the bottom and it just really rooted in there. So if you have a terrarium, I think you could just do the throw method. If not, if you just kind of want to keep an eye on it a little bit more than water, I think water works quite well. I just don't have a trellis for this. Maybe I need to raid Charmaine's plant room again. Maybe trade her something for another trellis. Or I could take a trellis away from one of my Hoyas and give it to this plant, because this plant is kind of a priority. And can we talk about how purple these backs are? Like, holy crap, so purple. What kind of purple is this? It's like Barney purple. Anyway, yeah, that's all I got to say about this plant. It's probably mad at me now that it had such a strong hold on the grid, and it was like so close to choking out the philodendron next to it. Probably pretty annoyed with me right now, but you kind of need to calm down. So this next plant was a wish list plant from last year. It was a plant that I got for my birthday. It's my Philodendron Jose Bono. So I showed this plant in August of last year. I filmed a haul of my birthday plants, and this was one of them. So it had just grown a little leaf off of the auxiliary bud because it was a bottom cutting from Jing's personal plant. It was already established in pond and self-watering. It had a pole on it. I cannot tell you how easygoing this plant is. It's probably like my easiest philodendron. So this is what the plant looks like now. It is kind of getting massive and it grows freaking nonstop. So this one lives outside on my open shelf in my plant room. It's under Barina lights, but only one bar, so it's not very bright. It really doesn't have any like humidity requirements. I mean, it appreciates warmth and light. It's pretty close to the light at this point because it's getting so tall. It grows non-stop. Like when one leaf is hardening, the next one's already coming out of the sheath. So this is the newest leaf that grew, and it's the most variegated one by far. It's so pretty. And the next leaf is already like halfway out. I've been seeing that this plant is in garden centers in the States now. They've just been released in like a local nursery here, but like for too much money. Like this nursery that's local to me either releases plants like way too cheap, like 50 cents, or like 2 times the market value. I don't think they have a very good sense of what the local market is for plants, like the market price. But anyways, I just wanted to kind of show him because as big as he's getting, he's one of the ones that doesn't stress me out as much because the growth pattern is falling off of the moss pole now. It's definitely outgrown the pole, but the internodes are so tightly spaced and the petioles are quite short in relation to the leaf size. So all in all, the plant stays quite compact, so it doesn't stress me out the way like a long petiole plant that like reaches halfway across the room would. I'm curious to see whether people just start decorating with these plants, like non-plant people, because it is such a fuss-free plant and it has quite a like nice structural presence, and it just kind of can become like quite tree-like. I don't know, maybe people will be decorating with these plants more, at least in like the northern hemisphere where these plants aren't just like found everywhere. Anyways, I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. I'm gonna put this plant down. Oh, my head feels like it's gonna explode. The pressure is just like right here in my sinus. 2 more plants and then I'm going to sit on the couch. So this next plant is my Anthurium Politiflorum. So I chose this on my channel in like an easy uncommon plants video almost 1 year ago. So just under a year ago. At the time it was growing in a slitted orchid pot in a mixture of like moss and orchiata. And I will say it did like that substrate, but it was so hard to keep that hydrated because there's moss, bark, and slits. So in essence, it could be one of those substrates or setups that you could basically be watering it like every day and the plant wouldn't be drowning, but I definitely wasn't gonna be able to keep up with that. So fast forward almost a year, here she is. I mean, she's not looking perfect, but she's growing way bigger leaves now. And it now lives in no drainage, in a mostly tree fern fiber up here that's mixed in with my, again, mixed with pond, perlite, and orchiata. And then down here, is a leca layer. I wasn't sure if it was going to like it because it did like that slitted pot so much and it was growing quite fast. I always say Politiflorum's one of my most steady growers in terms of anthuriums because it never really pauses too much in between leaves. Once one leaf is done hardening, you can see that the next leaf sheath is like getting bigger and bigger. So this here is definitely the biggest leaf that has ever grown for me. It got real banged up because things were just getting moved around a lot. It got kicked out of the exo because of this leaf. I was in the middle of just kind of moving all my plants around and I couldn't find a good spot for it. So in all the shuffle, it got a lot of cosmetic damage. And then this here is the current leaf it's working on. I don't think it's gonna be quite as big and I'm not really sure why, but you know, it's not a bad leaf. I'm a little bit stumped as to these. So it started yellowing a whole bunch of leaves at once when this leaf was growing out, but it didn't really concern me that much because like I figured if it was able to put out a leaf like this, something must be working, right? So it's probably just shedding a leaf to kind of redirect nutrients to get bigger. And maybe it is nothing, and I think this leaf was already like this when like that previous big leaf was growing. And certainly the roots look really good. It like, yeah, it's very happy in the substrate. So I have kind of half a mind to like hack these leaves off and then just be left with these ones here. I actually wouldn't mind that because these straps are so delicate when they're growing that the more jungly the shelf, the more chances it has of like getting all banged up. So if the plant was just like this, I think that would look quite nice. So about a month or so ago, I imported another Politiflorum, which has very super narrow leaves. It's graduated from the import bin and it's now living in one of my exos and it's growing a new leaf. So I'm very much looking forward to doing then versus now on that plant because like those really super skinny Politiflorum leaves, so good. Okay, we are on to the last plant. I was debating whether to include this plant because it's not like a glow up. It just looks different. But you know what? Let's talk about it. So my Hoya Nicolena New Guinea Ghost, here's what it looked like in the summer of last year. At that time, this plant could do no wrong. It was the New Guinea Ghost of my hopes and dreams because it was growing so fast, so vigorously. It was so bushy. It wasn't vining too much. It had that beautiful silvery minty, it was stunning. It was perfect. I was so proud of growing that plant. And then we got root mealies. I also chopped this plant up for Charmaine's mom. So two of the vines that were growing really long, I chopped them off and we are now left with this. And don't get me wrong, from a distance, it still looks beautiful. It has like really pretty purple sun stress. Now I'm trying to see if I can see the root mealies right now. And I think I can, although there's just so much algae. Okay, let me show you right here. If the glare won't get it, but right here is a root mealy. The first treatment I did on it was a Azamax soil drench. So just Azamax solution, watered the plant with it. That was right after repotting it into fresh pond. That didn't seem to get rid of the root mealies. And I think I did it a second time. Don't quote me on it, but I think I did. And the root mealies haven't taken over the pot like it did when I first discovered it. I'll put in a photo here of when I first discovered the root mealies and it was just like, it was everywhere. Right now it seems as though it's like very tame. What the f is that? What the heck? Oh my gosh. I was like, either Hoyas can grow tubers or there's a grub inside this substrate. Okay, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see it. Right here, I freaking thought that was a grub. Does that not look like a grub with the like exoskeleton? Turns out that's just a leca ball with white roots all over it that makes it look like a grub. I almost had a heart attack. I probably would have just thrown this whole plant out if it was a grub in there. Oh, so gross. And it has not grown a single leaf for me since I discovered the root mealies, chopped the plant, repotted into fresh pond. It seems to have rooted a little bit more, but not a single leaf. Although, I see growth points right here. 2 new growth points. Maybe she's coming back, I don't know. But anyways, This plant looks really pretty right now, but it's all a mess underneath. And the purple, the sun stress looks really pretty, but basically my theory is that this is not sun stress, it's just stress. Because when I was growing really silvery and pretty, it was under the same light conditions, and it wasn't until the root mealies that it started to get really purple. Like maybe there was a tint of purple. I don't really remember exactly when the purple started, but it got way more purple when the stressful conditions started. Basically when the root mealies happened and it got chopped and repotted and everything. So this is definitely not a happy plant. It's not a happy purple. It's a sad purple. But I thought I'd show it because it looks different, and not every plant is always going to be glowing up constantly. But yeah, this is the last plant, and hopefully this is just to show you that I'm not that kind of grower where like I'm gonna show you a plant that's like a little sprout this big and then boom, like a giant tree. That's not me. And I struggle with like wanting to grow plants big and then getting really stressed out when the plants do get big. In theory, I have the space in my home to house really big plants. I just don't have the light for it. So if a plant gets really big, I have to move it outside of whatever enclosure it's in, but then I don't really have well-lit spots in my home, so then I have to invest in more lights and stuff. And basically, I don't want my whole house to be lit up by grow lights. When the plants do get big, they do stress me out a little bit if I don't have a spot for them. It's really not the size of them so much. If they get too big for my plant room, that's when it gets really stressful. So I'm trying to figure things out as we go, but I definitely cannot rely on natural light. That's just not a reality in this house. As you can see from this video, I'm lit by a softbox and a ring light, and there's just basically no light coming from outside. And the sun is right here right now. It's just covered by basically a whole entire forest. Anyways, that is it for me today. Sorry for the really short video. Hopefully this weird thing goes away. I'm gonna be drinking lots of water. I've been just taking oil of oregano a couple times a day. It has helped because every time I take oil of oregano, I get like a burst of energy. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a like. I love you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Mwah.